Prepare to experience the strongest radio allowable by law. Secrets will be revealed. Myths dispelled. From the studio gym where excuses never apply, it's Superhuman Radio with your host, Carl Lenore.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of Superhuman Radio. You know, we got this new camera. So usually I can only see like from here up. Now you can see my torso. It's pretty cool. This is a bear tooth. These are one of a kind. I had one made for my son, Chase, and one for me, commemorating our first hunting trip about 3 years ago. And so I never see it when I wear it because I'm cut off. I look like a talking head usually. We have an interesting discussion today about time-restricted eating. A lot of people know what time-restricted eating is. And when it comes to metabolic things, it does some wonderful stuff. But there's a lot of people who wonder if it impairs muscle protein synthesis. There's a lot of guys, you know, the old bodybuilder diet is you eat every 3 hours. I did this. I mean, when I was a powerlifter, I did this. I ate every 3 hours. And then I even woke up in the middle of the night, usually when I went to pee. I had a protein shake in the middle of the night, which we know it destroys autophagy. Like stupidest thing I could have done. But we all wanted the most muscle we could build, the quickest. And then time-restricted feeding came in on the scene. And in fact, I did the first show ever on time-restricted feeding with Dr. Mark McCarty. He actually performed this study at the some hospital in New Mexico, and in Mexico City. The second study he did at UCLA was rodents. That led to every other day fasting and books like that. I think that was 2007. And ever since then, people have been experimenting with, thriving on. Some people can't do it, can do it. But the question has always been out there, what does it do for those of us who think muscle is important? And we're going to discuss that today with Dr. Evelyn Parr. Before we get started, I have to thank our title sponsor, Legendary Foods, makers of the sweet rolls. If you haven't tried these, you're missing out. You know, when you walk through the airport and you see that Cinnabon and you smell it, it's so good, but you know you can't eat it because it's pure crap. Well, Legendary took the Cinnabon and made it healthy. 1 gram of sugar, 20 grams of high-quality dairy protein, 5 net carbs that come in cinnamon, but also chocolate and wild berry. Pop them in the microwave for like 10 seconds. You will swear you're eating a Cinnabon. It's fantastic, and there's no guilt. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary. Use the code SHR10. If you have children in the house, order twice as much. Send them to school with them. All their friends will be jealous. They'll think they're eating crap, but they're really not. And they'll be hard to keep in the house, I promise. So check them out. Show them some love. Now, without further delay, welcome to the show, Dr. Evelyn Parr. How are you?
I'm well, thanks, Carl. How are you?
Wonderful, wonderful. So talk about yourself first, the university that you're affiliated with, your lab and all that sort of stuff, and where your core interests are.
So I'm at Australian Catholic University, which is in Melbourne, Australia. So currently sitting at 6 a.m. in the morning here, bright and early. Our university is a large teaching university, but has a big research focus as well. We have a lot of nursing students and education teaching graduates, and our research institute is interested in health research, and that's health of both an athlete and health of an individual in terms of healthy aging. I sit more on the healthy aging side of the spectrum and focus most of my research on individuals with obesity, individuals with prediabetes, individuals with type 2 diabetes, and a large focus obviously on eating patterns as well as what we're eating. So not losing those decades of dietetic knowledge that we know makes a difference, but also thinking a little bit more outside of the box than the current dietary guidelines, which just mainly focus on what we eat, and starting to think a little bit more about when we eat and how that's contributing to metabolic diseases. I'm an exercise scientist by background, and exercise is obviously a very important factor in my research. It's just not always the modified factor, but we need to consider it. There are health promoting behaviors when you do change dietary intake. Sometimes you change exercise behaviors as well. So that's where my research has sort of progressed to over the last sort of 5 or 6 years.
It's funny. We talk about metabolic disorders like it's just another silo, heart disease, diabetes, high blood pressure, endocrinology. But the reality is that you probably could look at all these other diseases and trace them back to being metabolically broken to begin with, right? We know that people with diabetes, type 2 diabetes, tend to have cancer. They tend to be prone to Alzheimer's disease, everything. So really, I feel like, if you're just trying to fix the domino fifth one down, but not going to the very first one that's starting the cascade, aren't we wasting our time? Shouldn't we all be focusing on metabolic derangement?
I agree. From a research perspective, that is difficult to do. Like, it is difficult to measure everything and say, what it is that's having the effect. So I definitely agree. How we actually trace that back, I don't know. I mean, type 2 diabetes was the old person's disease, right? It's the
Right.
pancreas running out of the ability to produce insulin in the manner that is required due to the stimulus, which is typically eating. That's no longer the case. There's still the people that are developing type 2 diabetes when they're in their late 70s, 80s, and now we're having, I guess, the stigma that, they've caused that. Well, no, they haven't. Their body is just not, their pancreas isn't supposed to live that long,
Right.
and we didn't used to live much more than 40, 50 years old until medicine improved and we improved the longevity of many people's lives. The issue is we're having people with these really strong metabolic diseases a lot earlier in life, and the interventions that I do are not prevention, they're, I guess, management from a way. I have done weight loss interventions. Everybody is working on weight loss. I've shifted away from that mainly because I know the evidence of exercise for not causing weight loss, but for causing many other health benefits that are going to improve overall metabolic health without changing in weight. And to me, time restricted eating kind of falls under that category of it's not going to be a big weight loss intervention, but it might have some pretty potent metabolic outcomes.
Do you know when, like, my grandparents called it sugar? Oh, so-and-so's got sugar. Like, in other words, this was type 2 diabetes. Do we have any feel for when type 2 diabetes became a wide scale problem with the population around the years that it started? Because I'm thinking exercise is an artificial replacement for something we used to do naturally, was work hard all day long.
Absolutely. I don't have off the top of my head the year range. My gut feeling is it's when the obesity rates started climbing. And as you say, when we're talking about cancer, obesity, type 2 diabetes, it's really the chicken or the egg. Which disease comes first? They're all interrelated. And the predisposition to develop one means that you've got a higher risk of developing another. So my gut feeling is that it happened at a similar time as we've seen those increasing rates of obesity, simply because, metabolic health is related.
So talk about your research. Why this study? What made this the next study that we needed to understand?
It came about actually because my boss was at a conference and presenting sort of the accumulation of our work, because he's a little bit more well known than I am so far. And someone in the audience said, I hear you. I hear this. This timing of eating is really important, but we know that protein stimulates the muscle. And we have been telling athletes for decades, have protein well spaced out and for a long time over the day to make sure you're maintaining your muscle mass. Because if you're not eating protein, then you fall down into the protein breakdown side of the equation of protein
Catabolic,
intake. Yeah, protein synthesis, protein breakdown. We're navigating that throughout the day in general. And if you do not stimulate the muscle, you don't make more muscle. You tend to lose muscle. We're starting to lose our muscle mass from, some would say age 30, age 40 onwards, and we're starting to decrease, and our total muscle mass. And it's really hard to build it back. It's possible in some ways, but it's really hard to build it back. And when we talk about dietary interventions, we're often losing lean mass when we lose weight. And a proportion of that lean mass will be skeletal muscle and muscle mass. It won't be all of it, but it'll be a proportion. And so if we're creating this environment of time-restricted eating where we're limiting the time window of which people are eating, that's of real concern for people who have limited lean mass or who are not moving enough. Are we actually making it worse? Like, is time-restricted eating bad? Because everybody else is saying it's good. Everyone's saying it's great for weight loss. It's good for, many different other metabolic health outcomes, but no one was really thinking of the muscle. And I guess that's the perspective we came at it from of, is it going to decrease muscle protein synthesis? Our most sensitive measure of the muscle building process. And if so, that's not good. And we need to consider that.
So what's really fascinating comes to mind first right away. I did a show last year before, where we looked at, autophagy. There's a baseline autophagy, and then it spikes under certain conditions, like during fasting, autophagy goes up. But there's a study out there that shows that when you fast, even for just 3 hours, the improvement in autophagy actually improves protein synthesis when you do stimulate. So, I kind of feel like that kind of that's like this, the two pieces of bread for the sandwich. Your study and that study says, hey, don't be afraid. Don't fear the reaper. No, don't be afraid of fasting. You're not going to lose your muscle that quickly.
I guess the caveat for our study is we provided all the food to the individuals and we made sure that protein intakes were a little bit above adequate. Right. So 1 gram per kilo of body mass. Now that's low if we're talking to anybody who's lifting weights in the gym. They'd be like, I need to be having 2.4 grams. But for the everyday person, that's enough. The RDA is recommended dietary amounts is 0.8 grams per kilo of body mass. So ours was all meals provided. It was at 1 gram, so we know it's more than adequate amounts of protein. And sometimes when people do cut things out, sometimes it is the protein foods. So that's, when we're talking about time-restricted eating in a everyday real life setting, there's still some question marks. I don't think our study answers everything, but we have to start in a very rigorous manner to do this and use the methodology, the deuterated water methodology that we did use to answer that question or answer that first part of the question.
Okay, so let's talk about the study. How was the study designed, and what did we learn?
This was an opportunistic study, Carl. I actually had a colleague who was looking at alternate day fasting and comparing that to chronic energy restriction. Now, the alternate day fasting, in my perspective, falls under the intermittent fasting umbrella. You're trying to reduce your energy intake over a week by, doing something on a couple of days rather than every day. So her question was muscle protein synthesis for alternate day fasting compared to chronic energy restriction. And we know that when people chronically energy restrict or cut calories, there can be an impact on muscle protein synthesis. We've from Amy Hector, Stu Phillips's lab. So she was going to run this study and had a control group. And I sort of thought, well, why don't we add that other group, that time-restricted eating group? We've already got a group that's going to be eating for 12 hours. Let's add the time-restricted eating arm and create a separate research question. So we've never compared the alternate day fasting, chronic energy restriction groups to my time-restricted eating group. It was always intended to be separate, but we used the same control group. So I'm very lucky to my colleague, Dr. Imra Kaur, who's now at Wageningen University in the Netherlands. I've pronounced that wrong, I know, every time, but anyway, that's where she is, and her work will be coming out hopefully in the next few months on that other part of the question. But we were able to add that time restricted eating arm to answer that question we got at the conference of, well, we've been promoting protein regularly, spaced along a long period of the day for many years. Now you're telling us to restrict it to 8 hours. And I think one of the misnomers of fasting research, as well as in terms of time restricted eating, we talk about the 16-8. You're not actually fasting for 16 hours. You're just not eating for 16 hours, because once you've eaten, your body's taking at least 3 hours to process that meal before you're actually into the more, fasting mechanisms towards autophagy, etc. So when you're limiting to 8 hours, you're actually, that's your eating window, but you're not fasting for another 3 hours. So again, something that I think gets missed along the way with time restricted eating. So we looked at a group of men that had overweight or obesity, so they had a BMI that was above 25. We tried to get as a homogenous group as possible. That's difficult with humans, but we recruited those individuals from here in Melbourne and started them on what we call a lead-in diet. So trying to get everybody on, we got everybody onto the same foods for 3 days in a row to make sure we're in a similar state. And then we started the intervention where we use deuterated water. So a methodology where they're ingesting a heavy water that we can then measure in body water tissues that gives us an indication.
Did you say deuterated water?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay.
So that's the methodology that we use. So we measure then the incorporation of that label into the body water. So we measure saliva and we measure the other plasma. I was like, we didn't take urine. Plasma and saliva samples. And then we take a muscle biopsy sample after we've initially loaded that person. And then for 10 days, they completed the intervention. So when we're talking about my arm of the study, the time restricted eating and control groups were given exactly the same foods, exactly the same amounts of foods. These are obviously different people. It's in a parallel.
Did you calculate a eucaloric diet for each of them?
We did, and interestingly, I mean, not trying to give away too many of the results, but we underfed them. So both groups lost body weight in that 10 days. So we didn't quite meet their energy needs, but it wasn't different between the two groups. So we underfed them in both groups. But their lunchtime was the same time. Their dinner and breakfast in the time restricted eating was 2 hours earlier and 2 hours later. So breakfast being 2 hours later than the control group, and dinner being 2 hours earlier than the control group in the time restricted eating. So we're comparing the 12 hours versus the 8 hours of eating.
Did you monitor glucose control? Well, first of all, were these diets ratios of macronutrients, or were they more low carb, or how did you determine what to use? Because those are going to skew results too, right?
Well, those are going to implicate your results. I'm not sure about skew, but implicate. Yeah. So it was, I guess you would call it a healthy generic diet that had adequate protein, 1.0 grams per kilo of body mass, and the same macronutrient profile at the 3 meals. Which doesn't always happen, because breakfast, here in Australia, tends to be higher in carbohydrate, dinner tends to be higher in protein, but we had it reasonably spread throughout the day.
And so, again, so they had one gram of protein per kilo. What about their carbohydrates? Was that like 20% of their calories, 30%? And then what about fat?
Oh, good question. I'm pretty sure we should have been at about 50% carbohydrate, but I actually can't remember off the top of my head.
I'm sure you're right. Because that's like the standard
I just found it.
diet, right? It's 50%.
Yeah, 50%, 56%
20%
carbohydrate,
fat, 30% protein.
30% fat. Yeah. And a little bit more energy at dinner, a little bit less at breakfast, because that's what people do. I like the studies that do 33, 33, 33 in terms of energy, evenly spread over the 3 meals, but that's not exactly how we eat, nor do we
Right.
just eat 3 meals. Most people have a snack in there. So again, we're modifying that, part of the behavior. We're
Yeah,
taking away
it's
most
a
of
real
the
diet. It's a real diet. You're not like going to put them on an elimination diet, which in and of itself will have its own effect. It's a regular diet. It's the way people really eat.
Well, and I guess the biggest limitation in the time restricted eating is that how people eat when they do time restricted eating? Some people do naturally reduce their energy intake on time restricted eating, and that's where the weight loss aspect, I think, or the majority of the weight loss comes from, is because you're not intentionally telling someone to restrict their energy intake. It's just a consequence of monitoring or modifying the timing. So, oh, you can't eat past 7. Oh, well, that extra bowl of ice cream and those 2 beers that you were going to have, they don't fit in that time window. That's a heck of a lot of energy that's then been,
Right.
or calories, as you would say, that's then been dropped from the diet. And it possibly changes diet quality as well, because we know not many people drink beer from 7 o'clock in the morning. It's typically an end of day food, as is ice cream. I mean, there are some people, no doubt, that eat ice cream throughout the day, but we have a lot of foods that are time of day foods, and that's another, I guess, when time restricted eating is just focusing on the clock time or the number of hours, then you're not directing someone that you can't eat this food, which in my experience creates a cycle of really wanting that food and creating an unhealthy association with it,
Mhm.
rather than just being a bit more everything in moderation.
And did you look at hormonal assays or I mean, I'm sure you looked at insulin, right?
We did look at insulin, but we didn't have these people, our participants, in the lab for more than taking fasting samples.
Okay.
So you bear with me. We use glucose monitors because they're continuous glucose monitors,
Yeah, they're
because they're
great.
great. You can pop them on someone, you can get a lot of data, but it's only giving you one side of the story. It's not telling you
Insulin.
if that meal then created a large bolus of insulin to be
Right.
released into the system that stayed really high for a really long
And
period of
this is
time.
a huge frustration of mine when doctors take blood sugar and go, "Oh, you're fine," but their pancreas may be at 100% duty to keep them in that zone, and then they crash. Without taking what did I used to say? I used to say, by checking blood sugar without testing insulin at the same time, it's like trying to determine how fast a car is going by looking at the distance between the gas pedal and the floorboard. You can't.
We're on the
You
same
can't.
page.
Yeah, I mean, and I still don't understand why doctors don't do that. It just baffles me.
Because it's a more difficult test. You can test blood glucose. You can just prick someone's finger and take a strip and measure it right then and there. You can't do
Mhm.
that with insulin, not yet
You gotta send it
anyway.
out. You gotta send it out.
Whoever's working on that, is like there's some money to be made there once we can measure insulin very, very quickly. So I hesitate to say that we didn't see any changes in insulin, but we only measured fasting insulin. So
Right.
it's very difficult to move that when you don't have a meal response test, right? So if you can't keep someone the entire day and actually look at what's happening over a 24-hour period and
Yeah.
take bloods overnight, because that's interesting as well, then you can give them a meal test and look at what's happening with glucose, but also what's happening with
Well,
insulin.
yeah, and then if you had a CGM on them, you were able to see responses to various meals, right? Because they kept a food diary. They said, "Oh, I ate these things." Then you look at the CGM and you go, "Oh my God, look at the way the blood sugar spiked." Yeah, so
Well,
that's
we gave them the same foods, and we asked them the time to eat it. So the CGM also gave us a little bit of that, because they were free living. Did you actually eat that? Did you actually eat your meal at the right time? At the right time.
yeah.
And our glucose responses showed that. Our control group was very good. It looks exactly the same from the lead-in diet to the intervention. And then when we look at time restricted eating, we see a different profile. We see it's the same breakfast meal, but we see a lower peak and a lower area under the curve to that breakfast meal. We see it is a different profile, but what we
Mhm.
don't see is what's happening with insulin. And we have a previous study where we used a very similar population, different research question, still looking at the muscle, but more interested in what's happening with metabolites across the 24-hour period. So we were taking muscle biopsies every every 4 hours throughout 24 hours. So they had 6 biopsies
Ouch.
through that 24-hour
From
period.
the quadricep? Where were they taking it? From the
Yeah,
quad?
yeah, from the quad. Yeah, from the quad. And so we're able to, see what's happening over 24 hours. And we had 24-hour insulin measures in that study. And we
Oh.
know from that we don't, or those individuals' insulin levels didn't drop down to basal levels between meals because the meals are closer together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there is more circulating insulin, but the measure of what's happening over 24 hours, the 24-hour area under the curve, was not different. So they had these three big peaks when you had the 3 separate meals and 3 big peaks of insulin. But when you had the meals closer together, the insulin concentrations were generally a little bit higher throughout that eating window, but the eating window is shorter. So that's offset by then insulin being lower throughout the day. Now, did that happen in this study? I don't know, because we don't have a 24-hour insulin, monitor yet. I say yet because I hope somebody's going to do it, not me, but hopes.
Someone will. So it's fast. It would be fascinating to know what ketone levels were, because the more metabolically flexible a person is, the sooner they'll start to produce ketone bodies. And it would be fascinating to know that as well, because ketones, while everybody talks about how they are an alternate fuel source, they're also a signaling molecule. They tell the body to do certain things, like autophagy. Like the presence of ketone bodies tends to ramp up autophagy. And we saw that in one of Dominic D'Agostino's studies, where they actually fed somebody and then gave them ketone esters, and they didn't see the drop in autophagy that they would have seen postprandial. So, ketone bodies are interesting. Would you look at those next time you do some research? I mean, they have take-home ketone testers now,
Totally. I just think you need to be a bit longer. You probably need to be a bit longer fasting, and you probably need to be a bit lower carbohydrate to have an effect. I mean, it would be interesting to look at. My gut feeling would be that it wouldn't have a large effect, but I don't actually know that.
I stopped eating at 6 p.m. and now I've changed. My window of eating is slightly longer right now, but typically if I stop eating at 6 p.m., I'll wake up with a 0.9 to 1.2 millimole of ketones. So I've been doing this for decades now. So my body just produces ketones very quickly now. And that I would think that that's an indication of somebody who's a little bit metabolically flexible.
Yeah, metabolically healthy. Like I think that, as you say, ketones is not always a negative fuel as it used to be perceived to be. It's not something, we've focused on a lot, but definitely something to consider in our future studies for sure.
So let's talk about protein synthesis before we go into this break, because that's what we're really here for. And is the protein synthetic response, given that these people weren't exercising, or were they lifting weights or anything like that? Okay, so
no,
that means that the protein synthetic response was driven solely by mTOR.
Yeah, by the protein intake signaling cascade.
Leucine,
Exactly.
Yeah, high quality leucine. Yeah. So what did you see? Did you see, like, oh my God, they don't respond as quick, or did the protein synthetic response just kick right in like it was supposed to?
So when we're using the method of the deuterated water, we're looking at it over a prolonged, the entire intervention. So we can't say it's a result of one meal or the other. We didn't see a difference, is the bottom line. We didn't see a difference in the muscle protein synthesis between the time restricted eating and the control group. And one reviewer sort of said, oh, well, it's only 4 hours difference. And sure, had our control group been eating over a longer period, would there be more difference? Maybe. But when we did the power calculations, we would have had 300 odd people in each group to have seen a difference. So if there's a difference there, it's very, very, very small. But the caveat being is it's compared to the same amount of food, it's compared to the same amount of protein. And would that happen in a real lifetime restricted eating? Maybe not always. And we're also talking about, excuse me, only men. We only use men in our study. That's not what I would have liked to have done. We didn't have the funding to have had, both sexes. Is it having a greater effect for women? We don't know. We'll leave that low-hanging fruit for somebody else to look at. But we were, I guess, mildly surprised and pleased that we didn't see an effect in this intervention, because we don't want time-restricted eating to cause impairments to muscle protein synthesis. We don't want people to be overly worried about losing muscle.
Right.
Yeah.
So the takeaway of this is it does not appear that time-restricted eating with an 8-16 window will blunt protein synthetic response to people like me who are interested in continuing to build muscle.
And interesting in maintaining muscle. As we get older, we're less building and we're more maintaining, and that's what's really important, because apart from moving it or consuming protein to stimulate it, there's no other way to help our muscle. There's no drug. There's no magic cure. It is simply making sure that you're eating enough protein and making sure that you're moving enough to use it.
What about anabolics? When you start to use things that are anabolic in nature, testosterone, men have testosterone, women have very little amounts of testosterone.
Yeah, and I guess that's the interrelationship with what's happening with menopause, that we often see such large body composition changes when the hormones for females, change significantly. I mean, I have no experience with anabolics in terms of muscle protein synthesis, and I'm sure there are many other people that do. So I'll leave that for you to find another guest to answer. But I guess my simple answer is it's move it or lose it. And when we're talking about people needing to also lose weight, or thinking they need to lose weight, or their doctors prescribing them to lose weight in this phase of their life, we don't want to be prescribing an intervention like time-restricted eating that's then going to have other deleterious effects on the muscle. So that's where we're confident in this protocol, where there's enough protein and where the energy is matched, that over 10 days we don't see a blunting of muscle protein synthesis, of that muscle turnover situation.
All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, I want to talk more about stay tuned. You're watching and listening. There are lots of concerns about food supply today. That's why you need White Oak Pastures. White Oak Pastures will deliver food right to your doorstep. You don't even have to go out and be disappointed by shopping in grocery stores. The finest beef, pork, lamb, duck, and more can be found at White Oak Pastures. And now they even have seafood. And best of all, White Oak Pastures has a negative carbon footprint, which means that you don't have to feel guilty for eating your ribeye. Go to shrnetwork.biz/whiteoak and use the code SUPERHUMAN to save 15% off. Millions of people know that shrewd food is the smartest way to snack. Ever get that craving for crunchy snacks, but don't want to eat all those empty carbs? Well, instead of puffed corn or wheat like most snacks, Shrewd Food puffs protein powder. This gives these crazy efficient macros: 2 grams of carbs, 14 grams of protein. That's as high as 67% protein, and with only 90 calories. So knock out the carbs, but keep the amazing flavor and crunch you're looking for. Shrewd Food is now available at Walmart and Sprouts. Or go to shrnetwork.biz/shrewdfood and use the code SHR25 for 25% off your order. I would easily say that I am the hugest proponent you will ever meet to doing anything that will improve the quality of my sleep. And that's because sleep is linked to just about every metabolic disorder we see in our population today. One of the easiest things you can do to improve the quality of your sleep is to get a pillow that can be shaped into the exact form factor that allows you to get your best night's sleep. And that is MyPillow. I've been sleeping with MyPillow MyPillow for a few years now, and I can tell you that when I have to travel and stay in hotels, I don't get a good night's sleep because I don't have MyPillow with me. Right now, you can save up to 60% off of everything offered to improve the quality of your sleep at shrnetwork.biz/MyPillow when you use the code SHR. Or you can call toll-free 800-889-4938. And remember to use code SHR to save up to 60% off of everything at their website. Great sleep upgrades you on virtually every level: body fat, muscle mass, mood, brain function, and countless other ways. But taking melatonin alone isn't the answer. Thanks to a brand new sleep formula developed by my friends at Bioptimizers, you can experience the best night's sleep ever. Sleep Breakthrough is a delicious sleep drink that supports your natural melatonin production and relaxation without creating a dependency, so you can have the best night's sleep on demand. It targets 5 different sleep pathways to give you the best sleep ever. And best of all, you'll wake up feeling rested and rejuvenated so that you can have the best day possible. For an exclusive offer for my listeners, go to sleepbreakthrough.com/SHR and use the code SHR10 for 10% off. Plus, you can unlock special gifts with the value of at least $20. This is a limited time offer, so go to sleepbreakthrough.com/SHR right now.
Spit that out right now. This is the Superhuman Channel.
Welcome back. Now we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about metabolic disorders in general, because we had some fun conversations before the show started. So the idea of moving more, well, first of all, I said people give themselves type 2 diabetes, and that's the way a lot of people look at it, but you really don't look at it that way, do you?
There is definitely a proportion of what is happening that is the environment, I think, and the genetic component. So there are some people that are wired more towards having metabolic diseases like type 2 diabetes. And as we have more people that have type 2 diabetes that are, producing other humans that then go on to grow up, we're creating that environment. We know there's a family history. So to say to somebody, oh, well, it's just all that you've done, I think is tough. And especially in an environment where we've got food all the time, we don't have to move very much. And we're saying, well, you've caused this disease, you've got it, now you've got to deal with it. I think it's a bit rich. I think it's a bit tough. And no doubt that once somebody does know that they've got type 2 diabetes, and it's not a disease that is very easily diagnosable, like there are a lot of the symptoms that can go unnoticed for quite some time, meaning that you could be quite far down the road before you're actually diagnosed. It's then on to the individual to manage it. Like it then becomes solely the individual, because nobody's changing the environment to improve things for people with type 2 diabetes. The person has to do that themselves, alongside all of the stigma of, oh, well, you've done it, so it's all on you, sort of a situation. So I agree, there is a component that is the individual, but there is, I also believe, a large component that is genetics and the environment.
So this is the discussion that gets me in trouble, and I try not to be insulting, not to you. I mean, when I'm talking to people, I just had this discussion. So there's a interview with Leslie Stahl going around the internet where this physician says obesity is clearly exclusively genetic. And I'd like to kind of parse this discussion for a second. With the discovery of the thrifty gene, which was like 10 years ago, I'm not fat because I eat too much. I'm fat because the thrifty gene. I would submit that all of us have some form of thrifty gene to have made it this far through evolution, right? Because we all, if we weren't thrifty, or if we didn't really highly utilize what we eat, we would fall over and become food for an animal, because we wouldn't be able to, I haven't eaten in 3 hours, boom, I'm dead. So there's that, right? So, and I understand when people say, well, genetically, some of us are predisposed to put on weight faster than others. I'm gonna say bullshit. I'm sorry, and I'll tell you why I say that. no one wants to hear the discussion about, like, you can't, okay, this is what gets me in trouble, and I'm going to apologize ahead of time, but the audience has heard me say this 1,000 times. There were no fat people in prisoner of war camps, none. There wasn't one guy, Joe, like they're starving us all, but Joe's 275 pounds. I don't understand it. Oh, well, he genetically makes fat out of air, right? So while, and the other side of my argument is, we don't just get our genes from our parents, we get the foods we love from our parents. The reason obese mothers give birth to obese little children is because their lifestyle, the foods they choose, and the frequency of food, and they don't move. And that's not genetic. Okay, now you can punish me. You can call me an asshole. Go ahead.
I mean, I don't know any part of modern society that is like a prisoner of war camp. And I think that if you did put everybody in a society like that, you would have a lot leaner population. Is that healthy? I mean, those people weren't healthy. We're not talking about the prisoners of wars being, having low BMIs and that being healthy, right? Like, and we put a lot on, I've made comment before that there are a lot of people that don't like BMI. It works as the population and analysis. It doesn't work on an individual level, and I often go back to
because my BMI is like 34 right now, so and I'm not obese.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, and metabolically healthy. But we know in terms of body shape, right? If you go back to you don't just spit out a human that has, that is lean, tall, and has no hips from, two parents that are shorter and wider of stature. And the misnomer of, oh, well, I've just got big bones. I mean, we do body composition scans all the time. The biggest, bone density that's contributing to a skeleton I've seen is 5 kilos, and I'm at 1.6 kilos of bone. And it is a large difference in terms of total bone mass, but in terms of adding on to your composition, it's not not really making that much of a difference. So, but you can't escape what is happening in early childhood, how you're provided with food, what food you're given, but also the body shape that you were born from, or you were genetically, came from. I mean, there are people who, and I mean, Kevin Hall's research, demonstrates this pretty well, I think, or at least he's been talking about it, that you can overfeed lean people and they don't gain weight. Like, there is something about those people that are that are lean, that are, because we know there's a lot of people that will fit that low BMI category that are not eating healthy, that are not moving enough. Something is happening in their body to enable that. We're also really, and I often talk about this, we're afraid of being hungry. Oh, you're hungry, you should eat something. Like that is our mentality of
eating.
Oh, you're fasting? Oh, that's weird.
Yeah.
Like, why would you do that to yourself? And it's just, I mean, I have young children, we're feeding them all the time. Oh, you're hungry? Do you want to eat something? We're scared of being hungry, and we're overriding some of our signals, but sometimes people's signals aren't working. And that's where I sit probably on the opposite side of the fence to you on the equation of, well, it's all on the individual. If someone's signals aren't working and that their brain isn't, giving them the right feedback, that's really hard to override. That takes a lot of mental effort. And in a society where we've got a lot going on already, like, I think that's tough.
I was 330 pounds when I was 39 years old. There was a discussion of fitting me with a pacemaker. And when I heard that discussion, I actually had just sold my company because I was sick. I had a dysrhythmia, which is different than arrhythmia. The right and left side of my heart weren't beating in sync any longer. So I was being told that I was going to have to put a pacemaker in. And I have parents that live to 80 and 90. I come from good stock. My father always told me, you come from good stock. And I thought, how did I get here? And then I kind of took inventory of my life. I was running a business I hated. I was eating way too much, like grotesque amounts of food. I wasn't taking care of myself. I wasn't exercising. I wasn't hardly moving except for work, and I had 3 children. And so I looked at my life and I said, I made myself this way. I did this to myself. And that means I can fix it. And I read a book by Deepak Chopra called Ageless Beauty, Timeless Mind. The only passage I can remember from the whole book was where he described the turnover of cells. Bones take the longest, this tissue is fast, these days, 6 days on. And I thought, okay, I made my heart sick. How can I replace those broken cells with good cells? And then that was my journey. I learned about weightlifting. I learned about diet and nutrition and sleep. I had horrible sleep habits. I fixed them. And I'm not on any medication. I mean, I'm on testosterone. That's it. I am. But I even stopped taking thyroid hormone. My doctor gave me thyroid hormone, and I thought, I wonder if I can live without this. And I just stopped, and I'm working fine now. So
I think that fork in the road.
Yeah.
I think that fork in the road, Carl, happens for a lot of people. Some people go down, I think, what your path of I'm going to change this. And I see a lot of people that have type 2 diabetes that don't want medication. And sometimes that is to the detriment of themselves, because
Right.
they've had type 2 diabetes for a lot longer than they knew about. Their pancreas isn't doing well, and they really would have a better quality of life with medication. I mean, medication is not always bad, but some people can really turn it around. We know a lot of the research, especially coming out of Roy Taylor and Mike Lean's group, that we can reverse diabetes. But those people that are likely to be able to reverse their diabetes have had their diabetes for less than 6 years. We're not talking about people that have had it for a longer period of time. And often that news of, oh, well, you've got this disease, in my perspective, is demotivating. People are like, oh, well, I've got that. I don't want to change my life. I like the way that I'm just have to deal with that.
Yes.
Versus the, oh, shoot, that's not where I wanted to be. I'm going to fix this.
In fact, I interviewed a woman from the UK, probably 2010, 2009, who published a study. It was an interesting study. It looked at the number of times a person had to almost die from high-risk behavior before they changed that. It's 3 times. Like heroin addicts, or pick a high-risk behavior that puts you in peril, and now they have to save you. And we all say, oh, God, save me and I'll change my ways. I'll give up smoking. I'll stop drinking. But then they get by the first time. They go back and they do it again. They think, oh, well, I that wasn't so bad. I turned out okay. I can start. And the third time is when they die. They go back the third time, and that's when they die. And I was fascinated by that, because I made such a fast decision to completely change my life. And in fact, it led to my divorce. My audience knows about this. My ex-wife told me she liked me better when I was fat. I'd be dead right now if I stayed fat. But it's fascinating. There's a lot of things that keep you from doing what you need to do in life, and it's hard. It is hard. I agree.
And that's, I mean, a lot of the patients that I'm working with, or participants that have type 2 diabetes, they'll often say to me, oh, my doctor said, I had pre-diabetes. I wish I'd taken it more seriously. I wish I'd done something about it then. And to be fair, pre-diabetes is very difficult to diagnose. So a lot of people miss that stage, and they go from thinking that everything is fine to realizing that it's not, in terms of their glucose insulin regulation. So yeah. And when you're in an environment where we're part of a group mentality as humans. We like to do things that fit in with everybody else. And so if your group, or your, which might be your family and your friends, etc., and you're saying, oh, well, I can't do those behaviors anymore, which is, going and eating those types of foods, celebrating in that type of way, you're then removing yourself from the group. That's really hard to do. And then I'm assuming that's the sort of, divorce type of situation where you're changing a lot of behaviors, and you're then very different to the person that you were living with before. And I think that's where it's very difficult on an individual basis, once you are diagnosed with a chronic disease that's related to metabolism, to make that changes in a supported way. And there are a lot of people that do. And especially, I'm going to be really sexist here, but, men are often, supported by wives or their partners that are, that means the partner has to change behaviors like, and again, being sexist, cooking, providing meals, etc., to help that other person. Does that always happen? Like,
No. In fact,
right?
I had to become militant because my ex-wife didn't want to eat what I ate. I cooked all my own food and I sat down with the family and I ate, but I was eating what I wanted to eat because I looked at it like saving my own life. And it probably was.
And the participants that we've had we're doing some work with people with type 2 diabetes, time restricted eating over, a longer period of time, looking at it as a more sustainable intervention. And those people whose families are on board and are willing to make the small changes to help the person that's on the intervention do better. Now, is that just because they're metabolically cut out to be that? No, that's a social interaction. The people whose families go, oh, well, you can do that. We're just going to carry on doing what we're doing because we don't have diabetes and we don't have to worry about it. That makes it really hard for that person. And that is my perspective, society in general, when we're talking about obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease. Oh, I don't have it, so I don't have to change it.
I want to take one last commercial break, and I want to come back and talk to you about this new phenomenon of body positive, at the same time, the idea of obesity being healthy. I want to get your opinion on that, okay?
Happy to, yep.
Stay tuned. I've said numerous times that B Strong BFR bands are as effective, if not more effective, than anabolic steroids. And as someone who has used anabolic steroids for many years and used B Strong BFR bands, I know what I'm talking about. You will see changes in musculature in days and weeks using B Strong BFR bands, and without any of the risks to your health associated with anabolic steroid use. Go to shrnetwork.biz/B Strong, that's BSTRONG, and use code SHR15 to save 15% off. I guarantee you will not be disappointed in the results of using the B Strong bands. Check them out. Merrick Health is a premium telehealth platform that connects customers with partnered providers from the comfort of your home. Merrick provides concierge service with your very own patient care provider as your health advocate. You'll go over all your needs and goals, from improving sexual function, hair loss prevention, increased muscle, fat loss, and overall improved performance. Prescribed treatment options can be ordered and shipped directly to you if you meet the requirements, all from the comfort of your home. Go to shrnetwork.biz/Merrick Health. That's MAREKHEALTH, and order your comprehensives and get 10% off with code SHR. Don't forget to add the lab analysis to have results reviewed with potential over-the-counter supplements or treatment recommendations. That's shrnetwork.biz/Merrick Health and use code SHR at checkout. Or order your own desired labs with code SHR and get 10% off your first lab order.
Dogs should be powered by fat and protein, not carbs. That's why Visionary Pet makes low-carb, ketogenic dog food for dogs of all breeds and life stages. From kibble to freeze-dried and even low-carb treats, all Visionary Pet recipes are very low-carb, ketogenic, and made with 100% real meat protein. Shop now and use code SHR for 20% off your first order today. Your dog deserves the lifelong benefits of optimal nutrition. Make the switch to Visionary and see why smart dogs eat low carb.
Never before has a product been so appropriately named as Botanic Tonics Feel Free. This plant-based elixir combines a variety of different effective compounds, all from raw plant materials that at different doses provide you with completely different experiences. A third of a bottle puts you in the zone and makes you very focused and is ideal for a non-stimulating pre-workout. It also has a mild analgesic effect effect for us older lifters who have soreness and little pains and aches that keep us from training as ferociously as we want. A half a bottle will create a mild euphoric effect that will allow you to forego consuming alcohol, but still be socially lubricated and have fun. I have never had a product deliver on its name the way Botanic Tonics Feel Free does, and I won't ever be without it, and you shouldn't either. Go to shrnetwork.biz/feel-free and use the code SHR40 for 40% off your first order. I promise you, you will not be disappointed. Remember those rectangular toaster pastries you used to love when you were a kid? Well, Legendary Foods has just made them better. The new cake-style tasty pastry is like nothing you've ever had before. With 20 grams of high-quality protein and less than 1 gram of sugar, you'll feel like you're cheating, but you're not. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary and use the code SHR10 to save 10% off your purchase of tasty pastries. Now available in cookies and cream, red velvet cake, birthday cake, blueberry, strawberry, brown sugar cinnamon, and hot fudge sundae. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary and use code SHR10 today.
You're listening to the Superhuman Channel. Don't hate us because we feel good.
Welcome back. We're talking with Dr. Evelyn Parr, and now we're talking more about type 2 diabetes and obesity, which is really the wheelhouse that she spends her time in. So there's a trend today to normalize obesity, and it's called body positive. And we see lots of models, and, God bless them. Look, I hated being fat. I didn't like the way I looked. When I took the kids to the pool, I wore big baggy shirts. I didn't like being fat. And I wasn't going to say, oh, I love being fat, to kind of like cognitive dissonance. The truth was I didn't like being fat, and my health suffered because I was fat for so long. Now we have this body positive movement, and it's being supported by people who are coming out and saying, you can be obese and still be healthy. And my analogy that I talk about on the show is like, if I'm standing on the roof of a 100-story building, and I jump, by the time I get to the 50th floor, I'm still alive. Even by the time I get to the 85th floor, I'm still alive. But I'm going to hit the ground and I'm going to die. It's pretty obvious. And so saying that, oh, look, I'm still alive. I mean, it doesn't hurt. It doesn't kill. Boom. That's the way I look at the normalization of obesity when it comes to health. What do you think?
I mean, I don't disagree with you in terms of the metabolically healthy obesity is more likely to go towards a unhealthy phenotype, in that there might be metabolic disease lurking. But I've also measured a heck of a lot of people that have obesity that have no metabolic syndrome, no high cholesterol, no high blood sugar, no high blood pressure. So in that sense, you go, well, something is different here in those individuals. And I think the main message of obesity is bad, and it turns into fat people are bad, they must be lazy, they're all of these things. I don't think that helps anybody. And I guess your counter argument is, well, it doesn't help them to also tell them that they're totally fine and don't need to do anything about it, right? There's got to be some, midway point where we recognize, and we've got a lot of science that, obesity contributes to a lot of diseases. How long that trajectory is very individual, is very individualized. There are some people that elastic band is going to pop and they've got, heart disease very quickly, versus others who seem to have a longer elastic band on that. But how do we get to a society that's actually supporting people rather than putting people down? And I think that as you would call it, the fat positive movement is in some way a small step towards accepting that everybody is different, but we've got to be supportive. And I come back to what I mentioned before. If you've got people around you that are not willing to help you make the changes that might need to be made, and if you've got a society that's just labeling you as bad, like, that's not going to inspire anybody to do anything.
And they don't have high blood pressure, and their blood sugar isn't ridiculous. But how many 600-pound people do you see alive at 80 or even 70? I know. Look, I know I can be a jerk. I know that. I have no filter, and I say what I think, and what I think is not always right. I've been called asshole more than once in my life, but there's certain things that I kind of feel like you just got to go, okay, wait a minute. Who are we fooling here? Do you know that Singapore cured childhood obesity in 2 years? Do you know that story?
No.
The government started a campaign to ridicule your fat child. They want the parents to point out that their child is fat. Now, will we end up with a bumper crop of mass murderers? I don't know, but they cured childhood obesity in 2 years.
But is that the child or the parent?
The childhood obesity.
Yeah, no, but is that caused by the child or the parent?
The obesity, the parent, most likely, by condoning and letting the kid eat like an animal. Yeah, no, I get it. But you understand, like, in order for the child not to eat, the parents had to stop feeding them. They knew that was part of the campaign because the parents were enabling the child. But I kind of feel like really important things in life and death things, we have to be brutally honest. We have to talk the truth, because it doesn't do any good to tell people who are 300, 400, 500 pounds that it's okay. It's okay. I mean, unless you don't care about them. Like, if I don't care about somebody, go ahead, do what you want, shoot heroin. But if I care about somebody, I got to be honest and say, this is not going to end well for you. It wasn't going to end well for me.
But they've got to care about themselves, Carl. Like, whether you care about, like, they've got to care about making the change themselves. Like that, like, at an individual level, someone's got to make or have the ability to enable those processes to make change. And change is hard. No one likes change.
I know.
And especially if you've got an environment that is not conducive to change. So, and I always say, if we talk about food and about energy intake just for the energy, like, it would be a completely different environment than the environment we have, where food is social, food is celebratory, food is, associated with our family and how we do things. And so if that is the momentum, it's really hard to put a break on that as an individual. And what we're saying here is it's the individual, or you're doing it, when there's a whole lot of things that are happening in society that mean that it's really difficult for that person to do so. And one is, people are really stigmatized. Like, and I see it in others that are around me that, are in healthier looking bodies. And I'll put it that way, because you don't know that somebody who has a BMI under 25 is healthy.
Yeah,
right? Like, they might look healthy, but they really might not be. So if I know people in my circle that are in healthier bodies that will lay judgment really quickly on somebody, and you don't know that individual's circumstances.
Right.
As a whole, as a society, we are bigger. That is not good. I'm not going to, dress around that or dance around that topic. But how we change that, I think that having some positivity of, you can be in a bigger body and you move more, and maybe you still enjoy your alcohol or you enjoy your food, and it's adding to that bit of adiposity, but you're still moving. You can get yourself upstairs. I couldn't care less. It's when you can't move that I think that there's a real issue. And I've seen that in people that are lean, and young university students we've tested that cannot do a bike test to where they should be able to meet just normal ranges of aerobic fitness, and probably they couldn't lift a normal amount of weight either in terms of weight, resistance training. And I think that's a real issue.
I mean, you have twins, you told me, and now you got big biceps, right?
Well, yes. I mean, my resistance training has lessened with the less time available, but I lift those two fairly regularly, because there's times where they don't want to walk and want to be lifted, and that's an activity of daily living. And we've changed lots of activities of daily living. I was also saying to you, I get my groceries delivered to my door. I mean, that limits the carrying of things around that is part of an activity of daily living for a lot of people that might be one of their only resistance training activities. Like
Opportunities, right.
we've changed our society a lot. I live in Melbourne in Australia. I ride my bike to and from work. I've just been to Europe for a conference just a couple of weeks ago. Everybody is on a bike. You're abnormal if you don't have a bike. And when you
Yes.
talk about active commuting, they're like, oh yeah, that's what we do. And that's not actually counted when somebody's being assessed for physical activity in that part of the world. Whereas here, it's so different. We're not moving a lot to get where we go because, I could walk 500 meters to a train that could take me right almost to my workplace. But I choose to go on my bike, which takes me, 25, 30 minutes each way. I'm getting an hour of exercise. That's a choice
great.
that I make, but it's a very abnormal choice
In today's
in
society.
my society.
In fact, I wrote an article years ago that the French paradox was that they walk to and from the restaurant. We know that walking after a meal causes amazing blood sugar management, better than metformin. And like if you're walking to the restaurant, you're stimulating all of these hormones that are related to exercise, and you eat. We also know that what your body does with that food is very different than if you were just slothfully sitting around for 2 hours and then and sat down and ate. So the French paradox, I would submit, isn't the wine, it's not the cheese, and not the fact that they smoke cigarettes. It's the fact that they walk everywhere.
Yeah, and that postprandial, post-meal activity is super important, and it's completely fading out of our society. We don't have to move very much to get anywhere. So, we're going from a restaurant into a car or onto public transport and at home to sit in front of TV or Netflix and carry on. And we're less active in the evening. If you look at a normal day's activity and you look at those three main meals, we have half the number of steps after our evening meal than we do after our lunch or breakfast meal. Quite simply because earlier in our day we have to be up and we have to be moving, and also because we choose more of those sedentary behaviors at the end of the day. That's also when our body's most insulin resistant. So, and our largest meal is at dinner. It tends to be in most societies. We eat the most at the end of the day. Some of the societies where that's not the case and lunch is the biggest meal, I think is probably the way to go. But again, that's a big shift in people's norms to change.
My post-workout meal is my biggest meal. It's my second meal. I get up in the morning, I have bone broth fortified with 30 grams of beef collagen and 30 grams of beef isolate. So my first meal in the morning is a drinkable 60 gram of protein. My second meal is steak and eggs, 6 eggs and a nice sized steak, and that's after I work out. My third meal, like today, is going to be a pound of beef, and that's it. And my fourth meal, before it's around 6 o'clock, is a redo of that bone broth fortified with protein. And I just started doing that because I sleep better when I don't eat solid food, like you said. My routine was eat at 6, sleep at 9. But like you said, some foods, like when I had salmon the other night for my last meal, I could feel it. It wasn't gone out of my stomach, and I was going to bed. I was like, this sucks. So I thought, you know what? My last meal is going to be that drinkable protein drink, and that's it. And I go to sleep, and I'm on empty.
And there's still a bit of a lot to do in terms of eating, timing of eating, and sleep quality, and that relationship. Because often when we've had some participants where we're saying, well, you're doing time restricted eating for this intervention, which means you can't eat and past this time, they then self-report to us that they go to bed earlier because they've got less to do, and that they're feeling better when they go to bed because they're not going to bed, an hour after eating. They're going to bed after, 3 hours after eating, sort of thing. So it's changing other behaviors rather than just that eating time, and which might be just, our focus is on glucose, but it might be, bigger than that. I think there's still a lot we can look at in terms of appetite, sleep quality, fullness, all of those other measures that we really have only just touched the surface on. And we discussed earlier our ancestors. Time restricted eating is really aligning with when light is available, which is when, primitive humans would have only been able to eat. You can't eat at 5 o'clock in the morning because you couldn't see unless you start a fire, right? So I think that's the way that our body's been designed. We've
Yes.
moved our society so that, we can have light all the time. We can have food all the time, and we can get anywhere without really moving all of the time. Does that help our body? Not really. And a great example, a study from an American lab, the author escapes me, where they took a group of university students camping for a week, took away all electronic devices. So we've only got either campfire or sunlight, and their melatonin, the time of melatonin onset, so when melatonin starts to be released at the end of the day, shifted considerably earlier to align with when the sun is going down or shortly thereafter, which, obviously has an effect on sleep. But we're wired, where our society is wired, that we're all the time now. And that's not good. That's not healthy.
And if anyone is counting, my daily protein intake is around 280, 290 grams of protein in those little meals. They're not laborious to eat either. Julianne Van Valkenburg asks if there was anybody in the study on dialysis. Because,
No.
I mean, they lose protein every time they have to go through dialysis, right? They lose protein.
Yeah, that would be a really complex condition to include in a study like this, where we were starting with proof of concept, and in the people with type 2s, we're often working with you'd probably say a healthier profile of type 2 diabetes. They're not on insulin. They tend to be earlier in their diagnosis, or since their diagnosis, quite simply because by the time you're getting down the pathway of more medications and needing insulin, you're at a more advanced disease state where diet and exercise, no doubt, are going to provide a benefit, but less of an impact than those medications, and requiring possibly a greater intervention than what we're talking about here in terms of time restricted eating and making those smaller changes that might lead to other health promoting behaviors.
Dr. Parr, thank you so much for getting up early and being on the show. I know that was, when we first connected, it was very early in the morning. So thanks for making the time for the show.
I appreciate it. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to chat with you today. I've enjoyed this.
And if you have new information coming out, reach out to Elisa, because we wait for studies to show up, but you may be able to tell us ahead of time, like we're about to publish a study, and let's get you back on the show. Okay.
Would love that. Thanks, Carl.
Take care. All right, that's it for today. Don't forget, share the show. Whenever you share the show, you may be helping somebody save their lives, give them the motivation to change their lives. You never know who you're going to help. And we'll see you tomorrow with more Superhuman. By the way, Friday, Porter Cottrell will be on the show. Porter is a good friend of mine. He competed at the Olympia back in the 90s. He was an amazing bodybuilder. Wait till you see what he looks like in his 60s. The guy looks amazing. And it's just more evidence that you don't have to grow old if you really don't. You can be 64 years old, but you don't have to be an old 64. All right, we'll see you tomorrow with more Superhuman Radio. Thanks for being here today.